Welcome to this webinar on universities and the COVID-19 crisis, problems, prospects, and pathways. Thank you for joining us via NUI Galway's Facebook page. My name is Daniel Carey, and I am Director of the Moore Institute at the National University of Ireland, Galway. Today's session forms part of a series that we've been convening here in the Moore Institute on COVID-19. In fact, it's the 8th webinar that we've held thus far. And I'm grateful to David Kelly, as ever, who is our Digital Humanities Manager, for his work behind the scenes, and also to David Brandt, who has joined us to broadcast this session. Today is especially significant because universities have such a contribution to make during the crisis, but they've also been deeply affected in terms of our students, our research, and of course, as employers. It's fair to say that the challenges ahead are immense. Our panel discussion features 4 university presidents representing Bristol, St. Andrews, NUI Galway, and Uppsala, who will discuss their response to the pandemic and assessment of its impact in planning for the future. Just to say that we welcome your questions via Facebook. My colleague John Caulfield will be alerting me to contributions and issues raised through that means. We're recording the session and we will post the video afterwards on our YouTube channel. I will introduce our speakers in the order that they will appear. They'll talk for 5 to 7 minutes each, and then we will have plenty of time for discussion. So to begin, Professor Ciarán hÓgartaigh became president of NUI Galway in January 2018. Born in Dublin, he was raised in an Irish-speaking home in Galway City and attended school hÓgartaigh and hÓgartaigh. After his BCom in Galway, he trained as a chartered accountant with Arthur Andersen in Dublin and took a PhD in accounting from the University of Leeds. Before his appointment as president here, he served as principal and dean of University College Dublin's College of Business, including its 3 schools and overseas programs in Hong Kong, Singapore, and Sri Lanka. He has published widely on financial reporting and on accounting history, and is a former Fulbright Scholar at Northeastern University in Boston. He's a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Ireland and the American Accounting Association Doctoral Consortium. He has served as Audit Committee Chair at the Department of Marine Communications and Natural Resources, and is a member of the Audit Committee at the Department of Finance. Professor Sally Mapstone was appointed Principal and Vice-Chancellor of the University of St. Andrews in 2016, the second woman in succession to hold this role. She is a board member of Universities UK, a trustee of UCAS and of the Europeum, and a member of the advisory board of the Higher Education Policy Institute. She leads on widening access work for Universities Scotland. She is chair of the International Advisory Board for the University of Helsinki. In 2017, Sally received the Foreign Policy Association of America Medal for services to higher education. And in 2019, she was elected to the Fellowship of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. As an academic, Sally is a medievalist with expertise in the area of medieval and Renaissance Scottish literature. She is president of the Saltire Society, which champions Scottish culture. Professor Hugh Brady became Vice Chancellor and President of the University of Bristol in 2015. He graduated from University College Dublin, where he trained in general medicine and nephrology, receiving PhD and MD degrees for research in renal physiology and molecular medicine. His academic career as a physician-scientist included positions at Harvard Medical School, the University of Toronto, and UCD. He served as president of UCD from 2004 to 2013, and he's also been chair of the Irish Universities Association and of the Universitas 21 network of global research universities. He's a non-executive director of Kerry Group PLC and Icon PLC and serves on the board of the West of England Local Enterprise Partnership. He was awarded an honorary Doctorate of Science from Queen's University Belfast, an honorary fellowship from the Royal College of Anaesthetists in Ireland, and the Robert Ming Medal from the University of Melbourne. Professor Eva Åkesson was appointed Rector of Uppsala University in 2012. She's a professor of chemical physics. From 1996 until 2011, she was on the staff of Lund University, where she was successively Pro-Vice-Chancellor and Deputy Vice-Chancellor. She's a member of the Council of the University of Tartu and of the Scientific Advisory Board of Tübingen University. She chaired the Matariki Network of Universities, the Southern African Nordic Center, and served as Vice Chair of the Guild of European Research Intensive Universities. In 2015, she received an honorary doctorate from the University of Edinburgh. In 2018, she was awarded His Majesty the King's Medal of the 12th size with the ribbon of the Order of Seraphim for exemplary work in Swedish higher education. And in 2019, she received the Skype Medal of the University of Tartu. Thank you, all of you, for participating. I'm sure your lives are consumed by online meetings at the moment, and I'm very glad that you've joined us for another one. I'm delighted too that our discussion can encompass 4 different countries and presidents representing 4 different disciplinary backgrounds in themselves. So Ciarán, if I could ask you to start things off.
Thanks very much, Dan. Garín Magat, agus tá fáilte roi bhélig gagáliamh más ansibh agus ar fud down freshen. So thank you all very much, and thanks also to my colleagues for joining and for Dan and the Moore Institute at NUI Galway for facilitating. Thinking about today, I was thinking about universities as learning organizations, and I think it's fair to say in the last number of months we've learned a lot, and I think we've learned a lot as a society as well. And one of those, I think, to reflect upon is the importance of research. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic showed more than ever the importance of not only of research but of high quality research, the importance of evidence and good evidence in tackling issues in society and in the healthcare system more generally. And I think, and I hope that that is a way in which universities can now instill or highlight this idea of the value of the university more than has been realized in the past. And I prefer always to rely on value rather than cost. And in debates such as this, I think the value of the university has been highlighted. Not only in healthcare, so in Galway in particular, I think we've been very conscious of the role we play in the medtech sector, for example. A lot of our colleagues doing really good work in cross-disciplinary work in medical technologies and very well integrated with the healthcare system in our region. And so therefore, both physically, as in it's across the road, but also more conceptually, we're very connected to the healthcare system. And I think our research has really helped there. But I think as the pandemic evolved and as its impact became more prevalent, I think we've also come to realize that there's a very important research to be done in reimagining our humanity and what it is like to live in a new world such as this. So research in the social sciences and business in other areas has really impacted on the life as it is. And much of the research that we see coming through in NUI Galway in particular is on some of those areas as well. So the impact of remote working, the impact on loneliness, on the more vulnerable in society. And I think this is a particularly important role that universities can play in looking at these problems from multiple perspectives. And what has been a health problem and a health pandemic has become really an issue for society and economy more generally. And then thirdly, I think the importance of breakthrough and non-incremental research, very often research that dissents. And I think there's a danger, there has been a danger traditionally that research is seen very much as replication. And research is seen as having an impact in its time. And I think more and more in the current context, we realize that research that looks at things differently, that predicts and that reflects on things in a different way is particularly valuable to us. And that's something I think as universities and as an ecosystem we need to reflect upon more. Secondly, I think it's very clear that universities have also learned a lot about our role in society. I've often said that our walls should be more permeable, and we know now that they are permeable. To use the phrase that we are not immune from the impact of the virus ourselves and not immune from the impact on society more generally. So our walls have become permeable by force, if you like, or by dint of the pandemic. And this has been particularly important to the university, but also shows our own impact on society. So our own way in which we dealt with the pandemic, the way we closed, the way we advised students, I think was particularly important, particularly in Galway, where a high proportion, nearly a quarter of the population of Galway City is connected to the university as students or staff. And I think that has a particularly profound impact on the city itself, but also on the region. And we now know that we have an impact on society. Society knows we have an impact likewise on them. And therefore, universities, I think more and more are seen as having to change and react to society and the changes within it. And particularly in the short term, we've had to do that here. No longer can we be seen as something that's separate or apart from society. We are a part of society. And what we did and what we do and what we will do in the future, I think we have realized that this is particularly important for social good and the public good and the economy more generally. And I think society has realized this also. And I think the sense in which research has played a part, the sense in which teaching has been disrupted. The sense in which we've been agile in that context has, I think, played out in public discourse to a greater extent than it would have been otherwise. This, though, poses challenges for us in the sense that we now know that we have a role in society, and society knows we have a role there. And that places more responsibility on us to provide good evidence, to provide high quality research, to be dissenting voices when necessary. So to be those places where there is no silence and they're placed without gates, if you like. And I think that's particularly important learning for us in the context of the role we play in society and in strengthening society for the future. Secondly, I think that there is that recognition of research, but more and more in public discourse, and I think that may be different in other countries, but in Ireland, the discourse around the disruption to universities has been about teaching. So while there has been a recognition of the value of research and the importance of research, conversations I have with policymakers and others is more about the academic year. This sense that September is what we're planning for rather than next week or this week when buildings open for research. And I think that's something we haven't yet realized, that universities have a much broader perspective and much broader mission than teaching. And in public discourse, I think that's something we need to think about more, in that it is students that understandably public discourse thinks about, but universities are much more than that. And the research we do leads our teaching, informs our teaching, and has a much broader perspective and timing in that sense. And that's something I reflect upon in conversations and in the discussion around when schools and college open, always is thinking about September rather than this week when we're opening to research. And then finally, and this will no doubt come up, is the role of technology. And I think technology is providing us with the facility, again by necessity, to do better. So I think we'll come out of the crisis with better use of technology, better facility for learning with the support of technology in ways that the generation of students that we now deal with and that we now work with expect, and that we'll be much stronger in that context. But I think that will never replace the face-to-face. And I think the on-campus experience is something we're finding now. It may be in time that internationalization will be more challenging for us, but we're finding now that students who are coming from overseas wish to be on campus, wish to have an on-campus experience. If they could do what programs online, they wouldn't come to Galway. And therefore the experience on campus is particularly important and will never be replaced. So I think a lot of the discourse currently about face-to-face versus online learning is somewhat of a false dichotomy, in the sense that these will, I think, more and more go hand in hand, and will be, one won't replace the other, but will simply supplement and support the other. Very different having an emergency transfer of the last 3 weeks of semester as we did to planning an academic year as we are. And I think that's something that universities will be increasingly challenged with, and is one of those pathways, one of those problems that we'd have. So as a sense of perspective, I think research more and more important, but I think that sense that we're now part of society, the society is within our walls, and the virus made that clear, that we're not removed from society, that we are, as I say, not apart from, but we are a part of society. And I think that's particularly important learning for us, but also for society itself, the role that universities play in providing that good evidence, that good research, and in providing that sense of dissent that is part of what it means to be reimagining our humanity. Looking forward to debate further, and thank you very much for the opportunity you're giving, Rocket. Thank you.
Thank you, Ciarán. Yeah, I was thinking about the architecture of universities, which is so much around the kind of fortress and notions of fortress of learning. So I like the emphasis on being permeable and open in that sense. Sally, so over to you, if you'd welcome your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Dan, and thank you for the opportunity to join this panel today. So from my perspective, for universities, addressing the COVID-19 pandemic has been both profoundly practical and existential. For Scottish universities, that has been intensified by their particular situation in a devolved administration. The UK entered lockdown unanimously, but Scotland and England are adopting different strategies to emerge. The UK Prime Minister's three-step COVID-19 recovery strategy, announced on the 10th of May, intends to accelerate the reopening of public life. This was rejected by the Scottish Government in favour of the more cautious reopening strategy articulated in what's called Scotland's route map through and out of the crisis, which, in the words of the Scottish First Minister, doesn't set exact timescales and moves gradually and carefully to prevent a resurgence of infection. The Scottish strategy holds distinct advantages for the University of St Andrews. There have been crises in the UK government's handling which have received international attention and have diminished confidence amongst students and their families. In contrast, Scotland's messaging has been lucid, its death toll has been considerably lower than England's, and last Sunday Scotland became the first UK country to report no new deaths since the pandemic commenced. The University of St Andrews is well placed to capitalise on these positive optics. Our rural town is 30 minutes drive away from the nearest city. People living and working in town have no daily reliance upon public transport, and incidences of COVID have been low. We also continue to be a destination of choice. The University of St Andrews is currently UK University of the Year in the Times and Sunday Times Good University Guide, and we consistently place in the top 5 universities in domestic rankings and the top 100 in international ones. These successes are significant given our small size and our demographic. We currently accommodate 9,200 students, half of whom are international, originating from over 140 countries around the world, and we have about 2,500 staff. This unique composition is something we cherish, but it is challenged at present. We've had a coronavirus response task force since January. When our spring vacation commenced on the 13th of March, we told all students that teaching would be delivered remotely for the remainder of the semester, and that if they wished to go home, they should do so. The bulk of our student population left, and our academic and IT staff used the break to transition all teaching and assessment onto online and remote fora, which feedback to date has shown to be a success. We continue to care for about 700 students in town, and we've relocated them in university residences on a single site. All non-essential buildings are currently closed to save cost and minimize risk, and all non-essential staff are furloughed on full pay, with the rest working from home. We've also offered our laboratories to the NHS for use as COVID testing sites, and a considerable number of our academics continue to undertake essential research into the virus. One such spin-out company, Pneumogen, has received £4 million to fund research into an antiviral drug which has successfully prevented coronavirus infections in clinical environments. Through all this, I've written weekly since the onset of lockdown to all staff and students to ensure that they are as informed as possible as to how we are managing the pandemic. So pre-pandemic life will not return anytime soon. We have to change our work environments practically and culturally to suppress the virus. Social distancing policies will be enforced through next semester and possibly beyond. Therefore, whilst our libraries, our residences, our classrooms will reopen, we must carefully control space and ensure buildings have adequate ventilation. We've announced that students will be taught next semester on a dual delivery basis. So we encourage all who can join us in St Andrews and be taught in situ to join us. But those who are prevented from returning to St Andrews due to travel restrictions can learn virtually until they join us in person. Beyond these pragmatic considerations, universities are facing unprecedented financial challenges. At St Andrews, lost accommodation fees, summer school, conferences and research revenues, and the need to extend existing PhD funding have created an immediate cash shortfall. Uncertainty persists around the proportion of international students who will arrive in September, though we're doing all we can through a concerted campaign to encourage as many as possible from our key markets. However, the potential recurring losses in tuition income from a diminished intake are enormous for St Andrews and the higher education sector more widely, but especially in Scotland, because of its funding structures. The Scottish and the UK governments have made clear that potential support will be contingent upon universities making efficiencies and responding to the need to reskill and upskill people of all ages, drawing on the expertise in online learning that we have rapidly developed. Scotland has 19 universities, England has well over 130. It isn't clear that all will survive or survive in their present forms. So while it is imperative that universities maximise their societal value, it's equally imperative that we retain the role of places which themselves generate challenge, disruption, and the capacity to speak truth to power. As society now confronts racism and the climate emergency, both of which can and should be recast and prioritised in the post-COVID landscape, we have to be at the forefront of both the discussion and the action that are taking place. Universities must put ourselves at the heart of defining the post-pandemic world. In many ways, that is the greatest challenge we face. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Yeah, that's a very powerful and important message there. I was interested too in your point about location as being a variable that's obviously really significant for universities. And some are in highly urbanized places and some have a degree of remoteness. It's kind of interesting with Notre Dame's announcement of reconvening early that they're almost treating it as a kind of bubble and they can do that on track and tracing as a, in theory anyway, to manage it. So Hugh, if I could invite you now to give us your thoughts.
Good, thanks, Dan. And first, thank you for the invitation to participate in the series. It's good to be back in Ireland, at least virtually. And congratulations on all that you and your colleagues are doing at NUIG in the regional, national and international effort against COVID-19. I'm sure we'll all agree the past few months have been extraordinarily challenging on a personal and professional level, but it has been inspiring to witness universities across the globe really rising to the challenge. And as has been said, as Ciarán mentioned, experts and evidence are back in vogue, and that's got to be a good thing. And again, picking up the permeability point, the value of the civic university is very much being appreciated in the way that it wasn't maybe even 6 months ago. I'll pick up on some of the points that Ciarán and Sally made. Indeed, they took some of my best lines, but that's the danger of going third and fourth. First, a few quick points on the impact of COVID-19 on the education process. I suppose point one is that COVID-19 has de-risked digital innovation with quite spectacular results. I mean, the remarkable global effort by universities to move online really illustrates, I think, the resilience and the adaptability of universities, which are often criticized as being slow-moving and inflexible and risk-averse, but that myth has been well and truly busted over the last 6 weeks. Equally, I think the crisis has demonstrated the spectacular enabling power of digital technologies. And it's worth, I think, reflecting that even 10 years ago, it simply would not have been possible to keep universities running during lockdown so that students could progress or graduate, that much research could continue, and that essential student and staff supports could be maintained. And I suppose most of our universities have been harnessing digital technologies over recent years, relatively slowly, I think, if we're honest. But COVID-19, in a matter of weeks, propelled us, I think, 10 years forward. And how, I think in the words of one of my colleagues, Claire Davis, who's director of the Bristol Institute of Learning and Teaching, COVID-19 essentially de-risked innovation. There was simply no choice, and therefore we all got on with it. And as Ciarán mentioned, I think future generations of students will benefit from this new sector-wide capability in digitally enabled learning long after COVID-19 has hopefully disappeared. The second point on education is that I think COVID-19 has radically changed the power dynamics within the learning process. So again, to quote my colleague Claire Davis, educationalists have been pushing us for years to move from the traditional model of the so-called sage on the stage to being the guide on the side. And again, I think we've been propelled to a world where staff and students are really working now in partnership in terms of the learning process, where staff are serving much more of a facilitatory role. And this, I think, is arguably much better for students. They're learning how to be critical thinkers, how to deal with uncertainty. But I think it can be unsettling for many of our staff, and some of whom require support in this new world. Point 3, education online, I think when it's complemented with face-to-face, has the potential to make the learning process more inclusive. And for some students, I think what we're seeing is that blended learning has opened up new engagement channels. So there are students now who will contribute to the chat or conversation function on the screen who would have never said a word in a face-to-face seminar or lecture theatre. Which leads me, I think, to point 4, and that there is a danger, though, of creating a new type of attainment gap due to digital exclusion. So I think there's an onus on us all, because we don't know how long this is going to last, to ensure that all students have access to the necessary hardware, software, apps, and safe and supportive learning spaces. And there's a real danger of us creating a new type of digital attainment gap if some students simply can't participate because they can't afford the digital kit. So I think some interesting changes to our education world. Turning to research, again, picking up on some of the points that have been made, we're now seeing just the critical importance of multidisciplinary research, particularly, which of course requires very strong, well-funded, high-quality disciplines, but also an environment that encourages collaboration. In my own institution, it's just been wonderful to see. We have about 150 researchers. So for many, of course, of colleagues, it's been very difficult because their research has been disrupted. But we have about 150 colleagues who have come together in a group which they branded Uncover, which is the University COVID-19 Emergency Response Group. And we had the advantage of some key ingredients, but to see them self-form and self-organize has just been fantastic. A word or two on some of those ingredients, because it does play to the importance of governments funding blue skies research, not quite know where it's going to lead. We're one of only 3 universities in the UK that for over a decade has had a research lab that is licensed and equipped to handle the live coronavirus. And Andrew Davidson, David Matthews and their colleagues were very quickly able, within literally weeks, to switch their focus to SARS-CoV-2 very early in the pandemic. Beside them, but unknown to them, was colleagues in the Bristol Max Planck Center for Minimal Biology, which is using synthetic biology approaches to understand viral proteins, study their pathogenicity, but actually to develop synthetic proteins that could be used as vaccines. We had another group, an immunology and vaccine group led by Adam Finn, who works on his own vaccines, but is also, in fact, the leading, I think, recruiter at the moment to the Oxford vaccine study. And then hiding over in another building in chemistry, the UK's only Centre for Doctoral Training in Aerosol Science. And colleague Jonathan Reed, whose research is going to be so important if we're to learn how to live with this virus. So, for example, we're all wrestling with face masks and face coverings and their place, 1 meters or 2 meters. And so much of this is actually based on aerosol science, using water, essentially, to study how aerosols behave. But of course, human droplets are not water. They're very complex, viscid, multi-compound, very complex substances. But I think for me, what's been fantastic is these groups hardly knew each other before this, self-organized into this very vibrant and energized group determined to shed light on the pathogenicity of the disease, on its transmission, and ultimately to develop the tools that we need to either leave or eliminate it. Second point about research, top quality research, despite many of our leaders' views, doesn't recognize national borders, but our funding mechanisms really have yet to catch up. So I think we're seeing that play out here. In the UK, we have a somewhat schizophrenic situation where we have the benefits of the UKRI's, UK Research and Innovation, the Global Challenges Research Fund, very good at particularly funding research with the developing world, complementing the likes of the Wellcome Trust. and yet at the same time we have the danger of separation from Horizon Europe. But I think if you look at the really good research around COVID-19 or in climate change, as Sally mentioned, it is going to be transnational research that's really going to get this done. But yet we do not have the mechanisms, the vehicles in place to really allow us to assess such applications, fund such research with the speed that's needed. So we have the WHO, we have the WTO. Why can't we do the same in research? And then finally on research, I think there's what's going to be a really difficult issue, particularly again given the political climate in various leading countries. Society has a moral obligation to make the fruits of research, and in this case, hopefully, successful antivirals and a successful vaccine available to all, and especially to the most vulnerable, no matter where they are on our planet. And this would be a logistical challenge at the very best of times, but an extremely difficult challenge in a world where populist and nationalist leaders are determined to erode the important vehicles for global collaboration, such as the WHO, and indeed to try and acquire by whatever means possible the fruits of research if it's not generated in anywhere other than their own countries. Finally, just two comments on the way we work, and the second picking up on Sally's comments on university funding. First, how we work. I mean, COVID-19 has radically changed the way we work, with long-lasting implications, I think, for the nature of our estate, for our digital infrastructure, for the way we support students and staff, and the way we spend our money. For many of our staff, certainly, we know that working from home is a good option, and actually it will be a good option for the university. But it challenges us to think of how we support them, how we assess their performance, I suppose moving from presenteeism to a focus on the quality of their work and their outputs. And to ensure that they're supported well in terms of equipment, etc. We're all, of course, then reassessing our need to travel, asking ourselves how much of our work with our universities, within our universities, collaboratively with other universities nationally or internationally across the globe, can be done digitally rather in person. And that's been an interesting conversation. I think ultimately for our students, there will be more options. So there will be an appetite for physical outward mobility, but I think technology will now give them an opportunity for virtual international study opportunities. And for staff, again, greater opportunities for global research collaboration. So again, I think that's an unexpected, I suppose, silver lining to the huge cloud that's lying over us. And then just finally, COVID-19 has exposed very serious, significant flaws in funding models that are likely to compromise the ability of universities to contribute maximally to the recovery process. In many countries, as you know, the UK, Ireland, USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, universities are overly dependent on international fee income to balance their books, whether due to inadequate national funding for education and or inadequate funding for research. In England, I would say that unlike Ireland, the level of tuition fees supported by the student loan system comes reasonably close to covering the costs of delivery to home students. But for say the 30 or so research intensives, the problem is we use the surpluses we generate from international students across subsidized research. The UK research system is very strong, it's broad-based, it's relatively well-funded, but we require a cross-subsidization of about 2 billion a year to cover the full economics costs of that research. To the UK's credit, though, and Ciarán, there's an interesting compare and contrast here, the government absolutely understands the value of higher education and research to the economy and society. It's a very different conversation. It very much appreciates the universities as a source of the graduate pipeline, the ideas, the discoveries, the technologies that will not just drive economy, but make our society and our services to our citizens better. And the importance of investing in universities if the economy in particularly is to flourish in the face of ever stronger international competition. So as Sally said, the sector is, and this was such a surprise, a pleasant surprise to me, is very engaged on a day-to-day, week-by-week basis with government through a new Universities Research Sustainability Task Force, where government departments, essentially, particularly education, business, and treasury, have said, we need to understand the hit that you're taking, its impact on your institutions, and how that will impact on your ability to contribute maximally to the recovery as we come out of the pandemic. Such a different conversation to the one that certainly I was used to in Ireland. And as an Irishman, I have to say that my children may well want to live and work in Ireland. And I certainly long for the day where higher education and research are central to the national conversation in the way that they are in the UK. And perhaps I understand that there are talks that hope to result in a new government. Perhaps this will be a new plank, which will be critically important, I think, for Ireland's success as an economy and society over the decades ahead. So thanks again for the invitation to contribute.
Thank you, Hugh. Yeah, a lot of points to pick up on there. I just mentioned a couple of things briefly. One was I liked, because there's so much emphasis on competition between universities, in effect, with rankings and a variety of other mechanisms. But I think what you're showing is that we're benefiting from the contribution that we're collectively making, and that makes a stronger argument, a mutual argument, I think. The other point, and I'll just pick up on it because it was already coming up in the questions, was about what I think you called the digital attainment gap. And there was one of our participants attendees was asking about that very question. So that's something that's clearly on people's minds. So Eva, if I could turn to you, and thank you very much for joining us. I think you're going to share some slides as well.
Yes, well, thank you for inviting me to participate, and I got the opportunity to discuss these important issues and also to listen to everybody here. That, well, it's not easy to speak as number 3. It's even more difficult to be number 4 when many important things have been said. But I will try to share some slides here with you, see if I can get it to come up here. So, and I get it. So, in view mode. Okay, I hope you see them now. So first of all, just a short introduction. Uppsala University, who are we and where do we come from? So we are up in the north in the Scandinavia. It's a comprehensive research intensive university. We have a little bit more than 45,000 students, 7,000 employees. So it's 50 to 60,000 people that are gathered here at the campus in Uppsala. Also, we have one in Visby. We have incoming, outgoing students. We have a large number of international master's programs. But I would like to emphasize, we do not have the proportion of international students that you see in UK, Australia, so that we have a much lower number. But we do have interactions around the world, and also it's not only student exchange. I was just looking at the number for our publication. I think about 70 to 80% of our publications are co-published with an international author. So being a part of a global academic family, I think, is embedded by within the university. But then something happened around the world. We got acquainted with something, Covid-19 or the coronavirus here. And I think we all more or less have the same story to say, that it happened something in December, but in January we all started to be a little bit nervous, and discussions about travel restrictions and so forth. And there was a more and more intense discussion how we're going to deal with it, and realizing this will not stay locally in another part of the world. This is something that we have to address too. So in February, we started with meeting restrictions with groups and so on, how you encountered, and also people were allowed to start to work from home. The 18th of March, all education at universities and colleges in Sweden had to move on to be online. I gave my staff 22 hours notice, and then they have to. So 10 o'clock the day before, I took a decision that all education, all examination, all assessment have to be online. 22 hours later, 8 o'clock the next morning, they did. And then we have had a recommendation to work at home, and that is still in place. And also a travel ban, both within the country and also no unnecessary travels are allowed outside the country. And I have a ban at the university. We do not allow any work-related travels to be done. Now we are in the situation that last Friday we were noticed that the recommendation on online education will be removed now on the 16th of June. But as already several speakers have said, the situation is not going to be the same. The autumn 2020 will not be the same as the autumn 2019. I think we all know and share that opinion. So then we have to deal with a situation where we do not have a ban of campus-based education, but then we have to how to balance this situation. So we have a slogan now for the university: physically when necessary, digitally where possible. So we have to constantly make everybody aware so they make choices, concerned choices. But at the same time, we have to try to achieve a high quality in education and research in everything we do, but at the same time work so we can limit the spread of the infection. I have given some guidance to my staff what priorities that they're going to have for the autumn semester, that we put priority to first year students. I think one reason actually why it worked so well to move everything else online was because it was the spring semester and it was not the beginning of the semester. The teacher, the students, they have met before, and also the students, they have friends, they have already socialized. If this would have happened early in the autumn, the outcome would be totally different. But we try to state certain priorities for on-campus solutions. And also for programs with a high portion with international students, we're gonna have a parallel teaching, so it will both be taught digitally, but then also on campus. So there will be an opportunity to join, they come to Uppsala later on in the semester. We have also acted as a university during this time. So in one way we have helped is actually we have entered the shelves at the university and walked over to the hospital because there have been shortages in supplies for the university hospital. And many people from my staff and students that have volunteered to help out the work at the hospital. We have rebuilt our laboratories to be able to help out with tests, analysis, and also reoriented a lot of the research to help out in this situation. But also students and staff, experts, they have been extremely active in the debate, but also we have also helped out to work with reskilling people with very short notice now, so they could go back to the healthcare and so forth already now in the spring. And also people that have been laid off, like people have working, for example, for SAS, and they have short courses and training so they could go into the hospital and help out in a very acute situation. The financial impacts at the university in Sweden. Well, in the situation here, we are having an increasing unemployment, and that actually means more students for the university. And also we have had several programs from the government and adding up funding for the university, both for this year and the upcoming year. You see some of the initiatives that's been taken here. So on the educational side, actually, I am financially better off right now than I would have been without the coronavirus. But then, of course, looking at the income from fee-paying students, that is down. We are counting now with a reduction of 50%, and that is a number that can be anything up and down. The uncertainty is gigantic. And also, we have a lower endowment income and some of the external funding. There are large question marks. We also in Sweden, we are waiting for the research and innovation bill that's going to come in the autumn. and there are large uncertainties, because I would guess, yes, in your countries, the government is addressing the acute issues and putting money in different areas. And the question is, will there be any money left in the autumn for research innovation? And we, of course, we're trying to stress the importance of research innovation, particularly in this situation. If I try to summarize the financial situation for the university, it's stable at the situation right now, and we have not laid off any person at the university, and I don't see that in a short time. In the longer perspective, I would put a question mark. Well, questions and strategies, how have we worked with this? Being in the university management, you are responsible for a lot of people, both students and staff. How do you deal with it? Well, my strategy, I have listened to the Public Health Agency, but I also have been sitting down with my experts, my researchers, and asking them, how can I interpret this? How do you view the future? How will the spread of the virus be in the autumn? And I have had very good guidance of my own researchers. But also, as you heard before, I think we have cooperated in many different ways together with the different universities and also other agencies. People have come together and actually really try to cope with the situation, help, and be the help for the humanity all over the world. And I think it's also have very good consultations with the local politicians and also the hospital that is just nearby here to deal with the situation. But also it's been extremely important to communicate and be totally open and transparent. Also be very open when you don't know. People have asked, how is the teaching going to be? Is it going to be online in the autumn? And I have to say, I don't know right now. You have to wait until I can make a firm decision. If I take a decision too early, it will not be a good decision for anybody. But also a lesson to learn is how to deal with anxiety and how do we all react to a situation with uncertainty. I think we have all as humans learned a lot during this spring, and there will be more lessons to learn. But how to make use of all the lessons that we have learned. As you already have heard from my college speaking before, I think we have learned so much when it comes to teaching and learning. As I'm trying to write here, we have made a quantum leap into the digitalized future. This week, I'm walking around to different faculty and sitting down, and they're telling the stories how they worked during this spring. And I must say, I'm so impressed by the staff and also by the students. And this is not only at this university. I would say we can be extremely proud worldwide how actually universities have coped with this situation, and we have not stopped. The education have gone on, the research have gone on in this situation. But also, I think many of us, we share a Zoom fatigue, and I don't think the teachers have never been so loved, and the students have never longed for their teachers so much that they have done this spring, and appreciate the few seconds that I have the opportunity to see them. But I also would emphasize the value of consultations. We really have used the possibilities to meet on Zoom and at many different levels, and to be able to talk to the minister, talk to my colleagues, talk to the community, the governor, and so forth, and more or less on a weekly basis. And I also can state that one consequence is that the university have got much stronger community relations. And I think this is something definitely to carry on to the future. But also, there are many investments, there are many recruitment processes that have been postponed. And looking at international students and the possibilities to study abroad, and also go abroad on a sabbatical and so forth, there will be a large impact. How large and how long is difficult to actually say today. And also, I think a special challenge that we have had in Sweden is to communicate and discuss with our international students and staff the Swedish strategy. what do we mean when we say how we say things? When the health agency gives a recommendation, for me as a vice-chancellor, that is a sharp order, and I obey. If I cannot obey, then I should step down. But for somebody else coming from another country or culture, say a recommendation is take it or leave it. So we underestimated the communication and talk about the culture differences, how we actually talk and communicate, and also governing in the country in the beginning of the corona crisis. This was just some of the items to share with you initially here. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Yeah, I was really interested in your emphasis on communications, which I think are part of the major challenge here. And that willingness to say when you don't know the answer to a question. I think that was one of the sort of things with Andrew Cuomo in New York, who seemed to be getting, even though New York had a terrible, terrible experience of COVID-19, Andrew Cuomo was somehow getting a lot of credit, partly because of his ability with communication. Many different things to pick up on, and we have about 10 minutes available to us, so we'll sort of, maybe your responses may have to be brief. I want to do a little bit of because you're representing universities in four different countries, just to ask you briefly about whether you think you are optimistic or not about degrees of government support. There's obviously been talk of bailouts and different kinds of interventions that government might bring to it. So, Ciarán, I thought I might ask you first. Again, are you positive, are you up, or you're down on the prospects?
Yeah, I'm instinctively optimistic, so that should color my response. But I think I was talking recently to somebody on the political process, and the word was, well, we love you but not enough. And I think the way, I think in Ireland education is highly valued, and the radical transformation that second level, a graduate of this university, NUI Galway, had in Donogh O'Malley 50 years ago in his investment in education. Now there's another opportunity for that with the new government being formed, as he was mentioned. But I think our challenge is to translate that respect for education into investment in education, particularly at third level. The coronavirus, COVID-19 might help in that, but I think there are so many other exigencies and particularly in the public domain, so many other things that are in people's minds. Universities haven't yet been that sharp edge of want that therefore translates into investment. So while I would be optimistic, I think we are facing challenging times ahead, and I look with envy at some of the other support, the financial support that others are getting. And I think I would worry therefore for the ecosystem in Ireland, in that if students have options elsewhere, ultimately over time they may go elsewhere. Although Ireland has a really strong, welcoming and very adaptable education system, and for international students has been a very great place to come for, and Galway in particular, for study. The support, I think we need to find our own resources first. I don't think we can rely necessarily on government support in the first instance. I think over time that may there have been improvements in the last 2 or 3 years, minimal, but I think over time that it'll come rather than in the short term.
Yeah. Sally, you were talking about the different situation in Scotland, obviously in terms of for Scottish-based students and whether they don't pay the same level of fees, etc. So what's your, again, this is an unfairly simplistic question, but are you optimistic or pessimistic about whether there may be enough support to come through to mitigate the losses?
Yeah, well, I'm looking for support from 2 governments, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to get double support. It's very clear that whatever comes through is not going to be a bailout. It's going to be something for something. And I also think we have to understand that the face of higher education is likely to change. The shape, the nature is likely to shift. And I think those universities that do best will be those that show a willingness to engage with that and to position themselves positively as part of the recovery. I do think that given the exigencies of the financial situation that both governments, Scottish and UK, are facing, that there is an element also of waiting to see what happens. So there is a hope that come September, international student numbers will hold up sufficiently to mean that the support to the sector can be calibrated on that basis. That's tough for universities that are setting their budgets right now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, thank you. Maybe I'll come to Eva, the situation in Sweden. It's interesting that you were setting out some of the financial figures there. Perhaps there's maybe less substantial need from what you're saying, if I interpreted you correctly, or do you think that there will be need for some kind of financial support and,
Right now, I would not say that we are in an acute financial situation, rather quite stable, as I was saying. Well, actually, we this year get more money from the government because we are asked to, can we accept more students already for the summer courses? And then we get more funding because we are not having a fee paying system. It's actually public that's paying for the students come from the government. And also, so during the autumn and already for the next year. So on the education side, I actually will have a larger budget, both 2020 and 2021, compare what I expected before the Corona crisis. So on that side, I would say we're quite stable. Definitely for international students, they are fee paying, that's going down. But we have so relatively small proportion compared to many other countries. So this is something we can cope with, I would say, at our university. Some of the other ones will be suffering more, and they are asking for support and help. But my prediction is that we can deal with it. But I'm more concerned for the long-term investment in research infrastructure, that we have the focus, and we will have a financial crisis that we cannot actually put in what's needed for research for the future, because we need research to face the challenges with climate and everything that's ahead of us. We have to invest more, not less. And to go through with that message now, that is my challenge.
Yeah. And Hugh, how do things look from your point of view and Bristol view?
I suppose picking up on some of Sally's comments, I think there will be, it's no secret, there are universities in the UK, particularly teaching only, if you will, more modern universities that are in danger of going to the wall, and if they receive additional government funding, it will be probably conditional on perhaps mergers, perhaps pivoting towards FE, just further education. And then if you look at the research intensive sector, I mean, I'd be optimistic, but again, picking up on Sally's point, the key question is, will there be enough investment, and will it come soon enough? Because if it comes on a wait and see basis in the autumn, the damage will have been done. I think the recovery potential will have impacted.
Yeah. There's all sorts of different issues, and I'm conscious that we're a little bit running out of time, which is amazing, because there's so much to think about and to consider in your statements. I just want to give an indication of some of the areas where comments and questions are coming in. One of them is rather to be expected, I think, is in relation to technology. That did come up in the remarks about the uneven access to technology, to broadband for students, some who may be living rurally and so on, is obviously a huge concern. Issues about student safety and the implications for students who may be in a vulnerable position, who wouldn't be comfortable, shall we say, returning to campus, but who may have this mixture of an obligation to be here, but not to be able to participate fully. Another question I do want to touch on is the issue of gender equality has been raised, and it's in relation to female academics, and it's a point that has been discussed somewhat, but it's interesting to see what your take on it would be. Women academics who may be adversely affected by the current crisis in terms of their ability to continue publishing, and there have been some reports on submissions to journals and so forth. So yeah, I see you nodding, Sally, and I just wondered if you might comment on that. Is that something where there's a strategy that's available to address it?
I think one of the things one has to say is that this is felt by women right across the sector, and that when you're thinking in future about how people's CVs look, how promotions are considered, we have to bear in mind, it's a bit like, we've been at war for a number of years, that this was the period in which people really were held back from getting on with their research, and that this can be seen, I think, to have a particular impact on women who often have not only childcare responsibilities, but caring responsibilities. Of course, it's broader and more complex than that, but I think the sector has a responsibility to show itself to be very publicly aware of this impact, and to not only take it into account, but to see down the line when we get back to whatever the new normal is, that we can do as much as possible to redress that through mitigation strategies that look at extended research leave and other practical measures of that sort. We have to not only show the recognition, but actually try in time to do something to ameliorate it.
I'd agree with that. We had a meeting of our external advisory group on equality, diversity, inclusion a number of weeks ago, and one of the suggestions was that we monitor now in order to mitigate later. So this is something that will come down back to us in things like promotions in years to come, that we need to then factor in evidence from the current experience. So I think that's a really important aspect of what will come out of this, that we need to be very attentive to.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to see that, the awareness of that question. And again, it's one of the themes of COVID-19 is the unequal distribution of effects. We're seeing that socially in terms of racial impact and so on, but it's just something that I think requires our alertness. Another question came in from Mary Hendrickson, who's at Notre Dame, in fact, and she was asking about how universities can, I guess, make the case for their impact. And that was such a strong theme of what all of you were saying about the contributions in research terms that universities are making. It's not just in research. There was also the point was made about universities as being places where you upskill in a time of crisis, if unemployment is high. Is there a way of kind of telling that story and drawing strength from one another's contribution? I guess that's a question for everyone, but I don't know, Hugh, whether you had some thoughts on that as a collective obligation or opportunity.
Well, I think maybe the answer was in the question. We have to make the case. We can't presume that that citizens and the wider community will be aware of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and the impact. So I think if there's something that we've learned is that we cannot take that for granted. If we want citizens to trust us, if we want them to invest in us, then they have to understand what we're doing. So it really involves a new partnership between the university and wider society.
Thank you. I have with time for maybe one more question to ask you, and it's really about, I guess, how universities are embedded within countries, because countries have handled the crisis differently. I mean, Sally, you were talking about Scotland, which I think has got a good record. There's obviously been more controversy, and we're discovering that health management is disaggregated through the devolved governments. And I think, Eva, I might ask you, because obviously Sweden has received so much international attention. It's been handled in a very interesting way. Do you think you will have an impact from the international assessment or feeling about the Swedish response, I guess, if I can put it that way?
Well, it's a very, I would say, a lot of debate, also in Sweden and also abroad. What we're doing is right and wrong. But then also, like, how different are we really? Because it's also a question of semantics. A recommendation in Sweden for a Swedish person is an order, but for another person, the recommendation is easygoing, but it's not here. So are we so different compared to others? So that is also something that is heavily under debate. But then also, I, as a Vice-Chancellor for a university, we are public authority. So I obey our health agency, but I have a lot of very outspoken researchers, and they should be outspoken. I'm very proud of them, and they are heavily criticizing the Swedish strategy. And to deal with this, I think it's a very interesting balance, because it's also I get a lot of questions like, how can you employ your researchers and you're doing this? Yes, I have to do both. That is my mission, to actually to encourage academic freedom, a critical debate on what's going on. That is the contribution from the university. But at the same time, I act as a public authority and have to commit to that. So I think that's really been put together in a very interesting way here. But I think this is a learning experience for all of us, but I think it's very good that we have this kind of interaction, have this kind of discussion, and also sharing, because also when I listen to colleagues around Europe and also the world, and I had a conversation with South Africa just the other morning, we are facing many of the questions that we are facing are very, very much the same. And I think we really have an opportunity to reach out to each other and help out in this situation in so many different ways.
Yeah, thank you. We're nearly run out of time. I did want to come back to Ciarán just for a final thought, and it'll have to be brief, unfortunately, but I was thinking particularly of the predicament of first-year students. And they haven't encountered the university as a physical space. They don't have relationships with teachers. One can't help but feel that they are particularly acutely affected by that as they're just trying to adjust to the whole experience. So I wondered if you just, again, some brief thoughts on how we try to find our way to that constituency and to engage with first years.
Yeah, so I think, and I'm thinking in particular by comments earlier, monitor now, mitigate later. It's also monitor now and mitigate now. And I think that's we're having to react very quickly to issues like this. And one of them, and I noticed others were saying the same, is that the on-campus experience for first year is going to be particularly important, the online experience. One of the things we're thinking about, and others may be thinking the same, is that each would be assigned a mentor. I've volunteered to start with that so that we have members of the university community, whether it be students ahead of them or staff, who help them through, because I think this is going to be a particularly challenging time, particularly unanchored, if you like. And that's where I think we need to find ways of bringing students into our context who haven't been here before. And that group and the postgraduate group, both of those, I think, will need particular attention in the autumn. And I think that's, again, a sense of the agility we need in undertaking that work. And very important, and I think the important point to come out here as well, is the sense of communication is a two-way street. Online, you very often don't get that. But I think we need to listen to students as well and seek out problems and listen to staff and seek out where there are challenges and try to respond to those as best we can. And I think that's appreciated, that we're doing it the best we can. But I think that'll be part of it too, is to also listen and find out where the issues and the pressure points are and try to respond as best we can in the context of COVID-19 as it evolves.
Yeah, thank you very much. We should end there. There's so many more questions we could have debated, but I discussed. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's been extremely interesting to hear your perspectives. So thank you to Ciarán, to Ava, to Hugh and Sally. And I think we're all in this together in that sense as universities. That's something where we have a stake in each one's ability to solve problems and hopefully to learn from each other in the process. So yeah, we'll be looking forward to the future in that sense and trying our best to plan for it. So thank you again. Thanks for taking part.
Thanks very much. Stay safe and well. Thank you.